July 10th, 1981. In the quaint town of Skidmore, Missouri, a town with only 437 residents, a local man and his wife walked out of a tavern to get in their pickup truck after an early morning drink. Suddenly, a mob of more than 50 people began to surround their truck. The man began cussing and yelling for the people to move, but they stayed put. Suddenly, a hail of gunfire from the crowd began to strike the truck, killing the man. His wife escaped without injury, and the folks standing by even helped her out of the truck. The wife immediately called the police. The odd part of this story is that she is the only person who witnessed the crime to call the police. Not one other person out of the dozens of eyewitnesses called an ambulance, the police, or anyone else. Why, you ask? Well, this is the story of a man who had it coming. Hi, I'm Hallow. Welcome to Freaky What. I love telling stories about mysteries, crime, paranormal, and anything else I think is freaky. I really appreciate you watching, and if you enjoy this channel, I hope you'll subscribe and watch my other stories. Now, let's get to it. When Ken Rex McElroy was killed in front of a crowd of people in broad daylight on July 10th, 1981, not one person from Skidmore, Missouri called a police officer, requested an ambulance, or spoke about who the possible shooter was to the police. Investigators immediately began hearing, "I heard shooting and I got down. I didn't see a thing." Every time a witness was asked what happened, they would all say they weren't sure. It was a well-known fact that McElroy was a butt to most everyone in his community. Not one citizen spoke well of McElroy because he was not only a nuisance, he was a criminal. He had previously been accused of many crimes in the town, including inappropriate behavior with children, assault, statutory you-know-what, arson, burglary, animal cruelty, and several more. Even though he had a laundry list of ongoing crimes, McElroy always seemed to find a way out, avoiding convictions, usually by paying lots of money to his attorney. Let's go further back so you can understand this bully of a man. Ken Rex McElroy was born in 1934 and was a longtime resident of Skidmore, Missouri. Ever since a young age, he had the reputation of being the local bully. In the 8th grade, McElroy dropped out of school and began getting into trouble almost immediately. The trouble began to add up, and he was quickly known as the local cattle rustler, the small-time thief, and a womanizer. For more than 2 decades, McElroy was involved in stealing grain, gasoline, alcohol, antiques, and livestock, but he always seemed to avoid conviction when charges were brought against him. McElroy was charged 21 times that we know of, and not one of those ended with a conviction. Most of the time, witnesses refused to testify because he allegedly intimidated them, frequently by following his targets to their destinations, to their houses, or parking outside their homes and just watching them. According to local reporters, McElroy's status as the town bully was more than an understatement, because those 21 charges are only the beginning. This next part is a bit disturbing. McElroy fathered more than 10 children with different women, although I use that term loosely, as he was most likely a horrible father. His last wife's name was Trina McLeod. They met when she was only 12 years old and in 8th grade, and he was 35 years old. He committed illegal acts with Trina repeatedly while she was still young. McLeod's parents initially opposed the relationship, but after McElroy burned their house down and shot their family dog, they begrudgingly agreed to the marriage. She became pregnant when she was only 14. She dropped out of school in the 9th grade and then went to live with McElroy and his second wife, Alice. McElroy divorced Alice and married Trina to escape charges of statutory, to which she was the only witness. 16 days after Trina gave birth, she and Alice fled to Trina's parents' house. According to court records, McElroy tracked them down and brought them back. When Trina's parents were away, McElroy went to their home, where once again he burned their house down and shot the McLeod's new dog. Then, in July 1976, McElroy became angry at a local farmer named Romaine Henry. Romaine Henry had heard someone with a gun was at the end of the road near his farm. So as he drove out to see who it was, he noticed it was McElroy. As he approached, McElroy began shouting at him, claiming that he had been on McElroy's property. Romaine Henry was shot in the stomach with a shotgun by McElroy. Luckily, Henry survived and the police charged McElroy with assault with intent to kill. But as the trial was put into motion, McElroy somehow avoided any consequences yet again. During the trial, McElroy's attorney brought in 2 witnesses who claimed they were out hunting with McElroy that day, and that they were nowhere near the scene of the shooting, even though every soul in the courtroom knew it was a lie. McElroy was found not guilty. In 1980, Trina McElroy and one of her children were exiting the local grocery store. The lady at the counter mentioned that she saw one of the children pick up some candy that had not been paid for. Trina immediately got upset and couldn't believe that they would accuse her child of theft. And that's when she told the employees, "Well, you're about to meet Kenneth McElroy." Ernest Bo Bowenkamp was well known as the town grocer and the owner of the market. Bowenkamp, a kind 70-year-old man, was sitting on the back deck of the store one day, just enjoying the nice weather. McElroy approached Mr. Bowenkamp and said, "Do you want to fight?" Bowenkamp said, "No, I have no reason to fight." McElroy, then alluding to the time Mr. Bowenkamp's employees accused his own children of stealing, pulled out his shotgun and shot Mr. Bowenkamp in the neck and left him to die. Thankfully, Mr. Bowenkamp survived this vicious attack. After a long recovery, the grocer was able to get back most normal use, and McElroy was eventually convicted of assault. While awaiting appeal, McElroy was somehow let out of jail, went and found the recovered Mr. Bowenkamp, and publicly threatened the grocer again while holding a gun. Perhaps the most baffling part of this entire story was written about in a book by Harry McLean called In Broad Daylight. He talks about how McElroy didn't have a bank account, didn't have a social security number, and he couldn't read. Yet, he escaped the consequences of our criminal justice system for more than 20 years. How did he do that? Now let's get back to the real day of judgment for Ken Rex McElroy. In the town of Skidmore, where animosity towards Ken McElroy was widespread, there existed at least one person who spoke positively about him. That is his attorney, Richard McFadden. McFadden, who regularly defended McElroy in multiple felonies every single year, described him as his best client ever. In an interview with Kansas City Star, McFadden praised McElroy for being punctual, consistently denying guilt, paying in cash, and persistently returning for legal assistance. He claimed to be McElroy's sole friend, which he probably was, stating that McElroy promised to provide whatever funds necessary to evade imprisonment. However, McElroy's ongoing conflict with Bowenkamp, the grocer, became the tipping point for the town. For over 20 years, McElroy had been a stain on Skidmore, continuously slipping through the grasp of the law. We were so bitter and so angry at the law letting us down that it came to somebody taking matters into their own hands, explained Cheryl Huston, Bowenkamp's daughter, to the New York Times. She said, "No one has any idea what a nightmare we lived." A town meeting was convened on July 10th, 1981. The townspeople assembled, gathering with the Nottoway County Sheriff to address the McElroy situation. The sheriff agreed that McElroy had been a nuisance and proposed forming a neighborhood watch and advised everyone against direct confrontation with McElroy, saying that there's nothing that could be immediately done. However, the townsfolk had different intentions in mind. You couldn't have made that group of people more unified in that moment if you tried. After the sheriff left, the group walked across the street to the local tavern where McElroy was sharing a morning drink with his wife Trina, a wife he had previously victimized when she was a child. Eventually, McElroy decided to leave the bar, and the mob trailed right behind him. Outside, they encircled his pickup truck, initiating a confrontation. McElroy began shouting, but he couldn't be heard over the sound of the angry mob of citizens. Just moments into the confrontation, multiple gunshots echoed through the air. In the crowd, identifying the shooter was impossible. McElroy suffered wounds from 2 distinct firearms and passed away while seated behind the wheel of his truck. Despite the severity of his injuries, not one person in the crowd or any other bystanders sought help by calling for an ambulance. In fact, the crowd left so quickly, the truck, with a passed-away McElroy, sat still and quiet with no one around for several minutes. Despite several inquiries from investigators attempting to unveil McElroy's killer, the truth remained tightly guarded. It became a cherished secret within the town. Once the shroud of silence fell, there was going to be no one talking. Cheryl Huston reflected on the killing. Skidmore's residents had endured McElroy's intimidation, theft, and abuse for too long. In a way, they saw his death as the only form of justice. However, law enforcement couldn't share this perspective. Despite police and even FBI efforts to unravel the murder, the townsfolk remained tight-lipped. 3 decades later, prosecutor David Baird retired, leaving the case file open. Baird remarked, "You could talk to everybody in this case and they'd give you a different answer," he said. "I'm never going to answer that question. It's never going to happen." Reflecting on the incident years later, retired Missouri Highway Patrol Trooper Richard Stratton acknowledged the town's sentiments. "Those were fathers and grandfathers on the street in Skidmore that day," he said. "Ordinary, hardworking people. They did what they did because we didn't do our job. Then they went home and kept their mouths shut and kept them closed all these years. There wasn't much David Baird could do about that." To this day, no one has come forward to identify Ken McElroy's murderer. His former lawyer summed it all up when he said, "I know why they didn't talk. They were all glad he was dead. That town got away with murder."